thank you for listening, and I look forward to our listening together. I guess at the end, Lori's going to lead us in a Q&A, so we'll do some mutual listening. All right, so here's the kind of theme that I've come up with. Pluralism and privilege are often toxic topics. Christians, sadly, tragically, tend to divide predictably along political lines in their opinions on diversity, power, and justice. I think that's actually tragic, that you can almost predict, based on someone's political affiliation, where they're going to line up on all of these questions, irrespective of their Christian faith. This conversation will suggest that being Lutheran, how many Lutherans in the room? Any Lutherans in the house? Okay. Being Lutheran offers us cross-cutting insights, bridge-building insights, to think prayerfully, listen counterculturally, and act lovingly with respect to these difficult and potentially divisive topics. So that's the academies part of our talk there. That's the topic. Now, let's just define quickly what I mean when I say pluralism and what I mean when I say privilege. First, pluralism, I'm going to define it like this. There's many ways you can think about it. I want to define it like this: interacting constructively with different individuals or groups while resisting factionalism. So it's a constructive, healthy interaction with a diverse group of people. We don't have a choice in the United States of America around this topic of pluralism. Privilege is a loaded kind of topic, and I'm just going to kind of define it like this: special power, opportunity, or immunity granted to one group of people, especially as contrasted with another group of people. So those are our definitions. Those are our terms. The kind of form of presentation I want to take today is one that I think is key to communicating in our culture, and that is one of narrative and dialogue. I believe that's the key to communicating in our culture: storytelling and dialogical communication. Do you know this comedian here? You may recognize him. Yeah, that guy. I actually don't know if I like his comedy. I've never actually listened to him. I heard him on NPR once. He was being interviewed, and they asked him, hey, where do you get your stories from? This is about narrative. Where do you get your stories from? Because some of you might be thinking, well, I don't have any stories. And Jeff Foxworthy says this about stories. He says, when you have your stories, he says, you don't have to come up with the material. You just got to remember it when it happens to you. So you got stuff happening to you. You just got to remember it, note it, take notes. Be a good listener of your own life. Be a good listener with all of your senses of your own human experience. It'll give you the stories that you need. And then dialogue. And I want to suggest that there's a difference between a discussion, a debate, and a dialogue. A discussion was what Martin Luther intended to have at Wittenberg when he posted the 95 Theses. He wanted to prompt a discussion. A debate is what Luther got himself into 4 years later in 1521 at the Diet of... Wow, this is a smart group. The Diet of Worms, which always sounds funny to me. A Diet of Worms. What are you going to... 1521. And a dialogue, it's hard to find dialogues in Luther. You can find a little bit of a dialogue when he's drinking beer at his table, when he has his table talks. You can see some dialogue there. But there's a distinction between these three, and I just want to kind of point out a little bit of the distinction. First, in a discussion, you present ideas. In a debate, you aim for success or to win or to advocate for yourself. And in a dialogue, you broaden your perspective. In a discussion, you avoid feelings. You have them, but you kind of avoid them. In a debate, you deny feelings, especially the feelings of the other person. Because it's a debate. Their feelings don't matter. Okay, you deny their feelings. In a dialogue, you validate others' feelings. In a discussion, watch this, watch how this works. In a discussion, you listen for places of disagreement. Now you may, with those disagreements, you may say, well, these disagreements are something we need to work through, or these disagreements divide us, but you're listening for disagreement. In a debate, you're doing more than listening for disagreement. You're listening in anticipation of judging and conquering with a counterpoint the other person. That's what a debate is about. And then finally, in a dialogue, you're listening in order to understand. Okay, so I want to suggest that there's three ways of kind of listening, three ways of sort of communicating when we're in conversation and in dialogue with one another. And I hope and I pray that our conversation today and that yours are real conversations. One of my new favorite Bible verses is from the book of Proverbs. It says that an honest answer is like a kiss on the lips. I like that verse. An honest answer. So this is all about keeping it real, okay? Keeping it real. Honest answers. All right. So, of course, it goes without saying that we live in fragmented times, in fragmented communities, in fractured families, in a divided nation. And church folk too often reflect all of this division, all of this fracturing, all of this segmentation. There's so much in life that leaves us discombobulated in life and divided. Church ought to be a place where we are put back together again. At the Milwaukee airport, they take you apart piece by piece when you go through the electromagnetometer. And when you get through this grueling kind of process, like in any other airport where TSA, which means totally slow and annoying, when TSA is, I apologize, okay. There are really good people working for TSA, I apologize. Okay, so when you get through on the other side, in the Milwaukee airport, I really like it because you get through on the other side, and they have an area there they call the recombobulation area. So it is, that's exactly what it's called. I took a selfie with myself at the recombobulation area. And, and that's what church ought to be like, because life just like discombobulates us. And in church and at synod assemblies, we ought to come together and get recombobulated. That's the recombobulation Lutheran Church. That's what we need. And so I want to tell you about the day that this guy here on this picture with the sunglasses on, the day he discovered he was black. Because you see, I wasn't born this way. And I went to college when I was 18 years old in Ann Arbor, Michigan, at a small Lutheran college called Concordia. You? All right, what class? What year? Oh, we just missed each other. I started in 81. But we know some of the same people. Let's talk after. You'll appreciate the story. You'll know the guy I'm talking about right now. And when you get to campus, like day 2 on the campus, one of the first things they make you do is fill out the campus census form, right? Where you gotta, and then they get to the ethnicity part, and you gotta check the boxes, right? So the first category that they had on this form was black. My father is Afro-Jamaican, black and proud, Marcus Garvey, Black Star Liner. We were raised in that. So I checked that box. The next category was white. My mother is Scottish, Highland, see-through white. She's transparent. She's so white. So I checked that box. I mean, you got to be what your mother is, right? You come out of her. So you must be what she is. How can you not be what she is? So I checked that box. The next category was Spanish surnamed. That's before the term Hispanic was in the lexicon. This is early 80s. Spanish surname. You do realize that nobody, by the way, is a Hispanic until they arrive at the United States of America. You know that, right? Like you're Venezuelan or Peruvian or Mexican, and you come to the United States, suddenly you're Hispanic. You're one of the 47 categories of Hispanic, okay, when you get to the U.S. But, so, we got this name, N-U-N-E-S, newness, like the newness of life we have in Jesus Christ. That's where it came from. Newness, all right? We have no idea how we got this name. We actually did some research on the name, and it's Sephardic Jewish. But that wasn't on the sheet for the checking, you know. So it's Portuguese, because it has an S on the end. If it had a Z on the end, or a Z, it would be Spanish, but it has an S, it's Portuguese. So I thought Spain, Portugal, same thing, so I checked that box. Next category was like Pacific Islander. I let that one go, although this room has some Pacific Islanders, I think, doesn't it? Yeah. And then finally, the last was international student. I was born in Jamaica, where it's nice and warm. At 4 years old, my family moved to Canada. I grew up in Canada, and now I was living in the US. That's 3 countries. That's pretty international, so I checked that box. The next day, this bow tie, much tighter than my bow tie, like far too tight of a bow tie. This bow tie wearing big man on the campus. 3 names. I'm not going to say his name. Middle name Vaughn. Serious. You got it, yeah. He comes up to me, apoplectic fit. He says, you can't be all of these boxes. You can't be all of this. You're skewing my data. He says, can you please choose one? Please, please. So that was the day I became black. I said, well then, if I have to pick one, that's the one I'll pick. And I started on that campus, the Black Students Organization on that campus. All 8 of us, because it's a Lutheran school, right? 8 of us. And the first thing we did was have a walkout. Because they didn't celebrate Martin Luther King there. That's before Ronald Reagan signed into the King Day Act, right? So this is the early 80s. So he was so sorry he made me black. We were protesting up and down that campus. But how sad, isn't it? How sad that you have to get like boxed in, categorized into these sorts of categories. Why can't we just be who God made us to be? Why can't we just be the children of God that God made us to be? I'm so happy that since the early 80s, we've been listening a lot better to people with hybrid stories, because we have new boxes you can check that are like all of the above now, right? Multiple ethnicities. These are my parents. They are members of the same species. They're actually both humans, which is why they're able to mate, okay, and produce offspring. Beautiful offspring. Okay, my father died 2.5 years ago, my hero, Neville Nunes, my hero, and my mother, going strong. But we were hybrid before hybrid was cool, before we had a president, before we had a car named after us. There is no such thing as a pure culture. There are no cultures that are pure. A man named Kwame Appiah has written a book called Cosmopolitanism. In that book, he traces yeah, I'm sorry, Monique, I'm off script a little bit. I apologize. Yeah. Kwame Appiah in this book, Cosmopolitan, traces the development of bagpipes that originated in East Africa. And the Roman imperial army carried them to Scotland, and the Scottish owned them and have owned them ever since. In that book, Kwame Appiah traces the derivation of kente cloth. Does anyone know what kente cloth is? Kind of a stereotypical African fabric. It does not come from Africa. It comes from the Dutch millers. It was made in the Netherlands and made in Indonesia. And then in the 1800s, gets adapted and adopted into African fabric. So something that's so characteristically African comes from Europe, and something that's so characteristically Scottish comes from East Africa. Cultures aren't clear. They're not clean. The next slide. Wani Anjo is a theologian I like a lot. She teaches at Garrett in Chicago. And she says this, that culture spaces are unfixed, unsettled, porous, and hybrid. Hybridity is the norm in terms of how cultures work and how cultures interact with other cultures. And even more so in of all places, the United States of America. We live in a time of unprecedented opportunity in the U.S. On the history of our planet, there has never been an experiment in pluralism like ours. No culture has ever, no nation has ever dared to undertake the sort of pluralistic project that we have in the USA. Way back before 9/11. By the way, do you realize that most of our incoming freshmen next year are born at or after 9/11 and have no conscious recollection of 9/11? But way back before 9/11, a man named Kenneth Pruitt from the U.S. Census Bureau said this of what the 21st century would be like. He said, the 21st century will be the century in which we redefine ourselves as the first country in world history which is literally made up of every part of the world. And I believe that God's got something to do with this. I believe that we need to listen to what God is up to. Listen to what God is up to in our culture and in our time. It is not by mistake that God chose the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea for the first coming of God's Son. It was the axis mundi. It was the crossroads of the world. You could get everywhere kind of from there. Asia had proximity. Africa had proximity. Europe had proximity. God likes these kind of pluralistic places and using pluralistic places if God's people are open to listen and to learn how to use these places. And so we see a dramatic demographic shift in the United States from 1960. In 1960, 88% of the U.S. population is white. By 2060, 44% of the U.S. population will be white. Most of you know that. What is this driven by? By things like birth rate. Mrs. Nunes and I, for example, have 6 kids. Daughter, son. Did I say that right? I don't know. And they have 9 children between the 6 of them. And they're all still in childbearing years. We're not done. We're done. She loves being pregnant. Okay. It's driven also by immigration. By the way, do you know that most immigrants are Christian to the United States of America? Like the vast majority of immigrants, like 70% or something, of immigrants are Christian. You did know that, right? Okay. And one of the reasons they're choosing to come to the U.S. is because it's you know, it has this Christians are here. I was in a conversation with somebody once, and they said, well, you know, Mexicans are Catholic. It's called Christian, yeah. I'm an immigrant, double immigrant. Thanks for letting me in. Hope I haven't messed it up too much for you. And so the landscape of Lutheranism is shifting. This is more than merely cosmetic. This is tectonic. Tectonic shifts. This is Carole King. I feel the earth move under my feet. That's what it's like. It's that kind of level of shift that we're undergoing. And so it requires unprecedented listening. Unprecedented times require unprecedented listening. I'm happy I'm at Concordia College in New York. We have a very, very diverse student body. 75% plus of our student body is so-called minority. The majority are minority. Minority is such an interesting word, isn't it? 87% of the world population is minority. That's true. That's an interesting word. I've got a friend who's writing his dissertation. He uses the term minoritized. Minoritized, which is a different sort of way of thinking about it. By the way, did you realize that 50 years ago, the United States Supreme Court was all WASP and all male? And now it is zero WASP? Tectonic shifts in the culture. In our time. This is a class I teach. It looks like a marketing photo, but it's actually a real class. I teach one course a year. I teach a course in rhetoric, and I teach a course in poetry, and in alternating years. This is a graduate. Her name is Malak. She is she's Orthodox Islam. That's why you can see a space between her and me when we're standing there. I'm very, very serious. I mean, it requires listening with all your senses when you're meeting people who come from different backgrounds, different traditions, and some people don't want males to touch females. And so we recognize that. We respect that. We have great respect. In fact, that's the kind of fabric that listening requires, a kind of fabric of mutual respect, profound mutual respect. A pluralistic society requires first listening with profound mutual respect. Evangelism in a pluralistic world requires first listening with profound mutual respect. Richard John Newhouse said this about evangelism, that the renewal of evangelism requires, of course, passion and preparedness to go out in the name of Jesus. Of course, nobody would disagree with that. But in order to encounter people in their maddening diversities, I mean, maybe their diversities are dizzying and driving you mad, but that's That's what the world is. With profound respect for the questions they are carrying on the way to their Lord. We must be first listening. And the onus, sister, the onus, brother, is on us. The onus is on us. Turn to someone next to you and tell them, the onus is on us. Turn to the person now and tell them, the onus is on us. 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 Isn't that interesting? The onus is on us. The onus is on us, okay? It's on us. Especially for those of us to whom much has been given. If you have an education, if you're a Protestant Christian, if you're heterosexual, if you're male, if you're a lighter-skinned black male, privilege is yours. Privilege exists. Privilege is a real thing. I know a lot of folk get nervous talking about privilege, but privilege is a real thing. Let me tell you a few stories of privilege in my own life. When I became president 3 years ago at Concordia College, I inherited a leased vehicle that the prior president had leased. It wasn't my idea, but I took the Jaguar and for a year, because that's the lease. When the lease was up, I couldn't turn it in early. When the lease was up, I now drive a Ford Taurus, okay, very Lutheran vehicle, Ford Taurus, okay. But so I was driving my leased Jaguar one morning on my way back home from the gym at about 6:30 a.m. in one of the nearing or neighboring villages. These are all boutique villages on the outskirts of South Westchester County, just north of the Bronx in New York. And I was driving and I had gym clothes on, and I was driving back, and I came up to one of those octagonal signs. You know those reddish octagonal signs, okay, with a 4-letter word on it. And it was early, and there was nobody around. And so I did, what do they call it, a California stop? Yeah, okay. And I just kind of, looked left, looked right, okay, went through. There he was. Lights on, right up behind me. Okay, he comes to my window. I'm like 10 to 2. Okay, I'm ready for him. He says, "Sir, you know why I pulled you over?" I said, "Of course I do, officer." That was a very sloppy stop. You see, I still said the word stop because I wanted him to give me an out, right? So I said it was a sloppy stop, is what I said. He said, "No, you didn't stop." He says, "License, registration, please." I said, "May I reach for the glove compartment?" Which is what I teach my son. I'm going to say more about him in a moment. And so I reached for the glove compartment, took the license, registration out. License was in my wallet, registration out, handed it to him. He said, so where are you heading? I said, Concordia College. He says, the president. He said, have a great day. Watch those stops. True story. My son is about 2 inches taller than I am. He's very athletic. He had a great college football career. Had a couple NFL tryouts. He still considers himself an NFL free agent. He's got a mohawk haircut, dreadlocks on the top, mohawk haircut. He's kind of imposing to look at. He had one unpaid parking ticket. 4 cop cars to pull him over. Same town. Village, excuse me. When they discovered who he was, because his name is the same as my name, John Nunes, Jr., for this arrestable offense, which it is in that village, one unpaid parking ticket is arrestable in that village. They let him walk home. This happened 2 months ago. They set a court hearing for him, and he asked me if I'd go with him. We go to court, the two of us, and the judge, I look up, and he's a patron of Concordia College. And he basically winks at me and invites me forward. I'm not a lawyer. He invites me forward. He said, what happened? I told him the story. He says, we can work this out. We're out of there in 2 minutes. From profiling to privilege. So this boy was profiled. This son of mine was profiled 4 cop cars, 1 unpaid ticket. Think of all the ways that could have gone bad. To privilege. So privilege, I'm telling you, privilege is real. I want to thank you for it, by the way. I borrowed a lot of your privilege. I'm like borrowing Lutheran privilege big time. Okay, thank you for letting me in. But I'm being halfway facetious. But it's a true thing. It's a real thing. Privilege is a true thing. At Valparaiso University, we were arranging to have a commencement speaker, and the commencement speaker we agreed upon was Arne Sorensen. Does anyone know that name? He's the president and CEO of Marriott Corporation. He and his wife Ruth have been good friends to Monique and me, so we recruited him to be the commencement speaker at Valpo. We hosted him, and we were happy to do so. By the way, please pray for Arne Sorensen. It was a press release this week. He was just diagnosed with stage 2 pancreatic cancer. He intends to continue working his way through at Marriott Corporation. So he's a Lutheran. He's the first Lutheran, obviously, who has been the CEO of Marriott. And we had him as our commencement speaker 3 years ago. About a week before the commencement, one of the administrative assistants came to me and she said, yeah, we got everything taken care of. We got him, staying at the embassy suites over here. She said, well, I said, what? She said, that's where we get our rates. That's where we get our rates. We gotta respect the rates. I said, did you read his bio at all? Did you, shh. So I picked up the phone, and I called the Fairfield Inn, which is owned and operated by Marriott. And I said, we have a problem. We need a room for next weekend. She said, are you joking? She says, you can't get a room. It's like book solid. This is commencement weekend. I said, our commencement speaker is your guy, your CEO. She said, yeah, right. That's exactly what she said. I said, go check our website. She went and checked the website. She came back and she says, we got a room for you. It's called privilege. It exists. So I think we don't need to be guilt-tripping over not whether we have privilege. I think we just need to use our privilege for what it is, leveraging it for the sake of others. And Martin Luther has something to say about this. 2 slides. Luther says, for you are powerful, not that you may make the weak weaker by oppression. This is Luther. But that you may make them powerful by raising them up and defending them. God expects us to use our privilege to make a difference. God expects us to use our privilege in service for the world. Like Jesus in this beautiful Ethiopian art, Jesus washing the disciples' feet. Or like the New York socialite Brooke Astor, who said that power is the ability to do good things for others. That's why we have power. That's why God gives us power and privilege. Not to deny it and pretend we don't have it, but to use it for the sake of others. So I want to talk a little bit about diversity. Let's skip to this diversity slide. Who are these others to whom God has called us? And I have an acrostic I use for diversity, D-I-V-E-R-S-I-T-Y. D, different. Turn to someone near you and tell them you're different. If they laugh, tell them you're really different. No, do that. Do that now. You're different. You're... Nice. And yeah. And difference is a good thing. That's like God built. Did you hear the prayers yesterday, Bishop? During the prayers yesterday, I heard this prayer, regardless of talent or years. But because of our pluralistic environment, rather than turning outward and looking up at neighbor, sin turns us back inward. Tribalism is intensified by pluralism. And there is a Lutheran way of describing this. It's the Lutheran understanding of what sin is. In curvatus, in se, ipsum. To be radically turned in on oneself. I have a question about the time, sir. Thank you. Pardon? 44. Okay. Thank you very much. I understood more of the tone of her voice than you did. So I would like to skip ahead to modify with eyeglasses on. When we listen to all sides, when we pay attention to all sides, it helps us to modify what we see. When we listen, it helps us to modify what we see. I want to just tell one more story and then I'll wrap up. Yeah, that'd be really good. Okay. So this is a situation that happened also involving a police stop in Valparaiso, Indiana, which is one of the most difficult places Monique and I have ever lived, Northwest Indiana. We moved there and bought a historic home that we planned to spend the rest of our life in Valpo, and it just didn't work out for lots of reasons in that community. The home was a beautiful home on a corner intersection, and about several weeks after moving in, we began to receive the mail. We got a letter from a credit card company addressed to Bob, B-O-B, and last name N-I-I-G-G-E-R-S. And that's actually not our name, so I called the credit card company after the second letter came. And I said, I want to check the integrity of your mailing list. And the woman said, well, that could be a name. And I said, and how would you pronounce it? She said, I'm not going to say it. I said, that might be a clue it's not a name. May I speak to your supervisor? Supervisor gets on. She says, well, who lived there before you? And we actually know who lived there before we did. You can't make this up. The man's name was Alan White. He now teaches at New York University School of Law, which is a different sort of name than this. The community, the university was fabulous, but the community was, I'm like, this is 2013? This is going on in the U.S.? Our house got attacked one night by these young men. Just lots of incidences in Valpo. One incident happened a couple blocks from the campus involving some of our basketball players who were African American. Because our house was located at a prime corner intersection, when the Porter County Sheriff was running for re-election, his name was David Reynolds, he asked me if he could put a sign up on our yard. And I said, absolutely, sure, put the sign up. He said, look, if you ever need anything, just reach out. So over here, a couple blocks from campus, we had an incident involving some of our young men on our basketball team. And it was an incident that went bad. Nobody was killed, but somebody could have been. I mean, it was a belligerent, bellicose situation between an officer who pulled over this car. The car claims it was for no reason. An encounter occurred between the two of them, and it actually went viral. I mean, someone caught it on camera. It was a really tough incident, really bad incident. The community was up in arms. The social activists in the community were prepared to march and were angry, and rightfully. And the Police Benevolent Association was just as angry on the other side. And a colleague and I decided that we were going to try and build some bridges between these two communities, because we wanted a different sort of outcome than all of the outcomes and you pick the city and all the other ones. So what we did was we invited, I called up the sheriff. I said, hey, remember when you put the sign up? I said, why don't you come over to the house? So we'd like to just sit and talk with you. He later admitted that he had 3 cars circling the house because he thought he was getting set up. Yeah. So nonetheless, come over and let's just talk. So, I mean, the community was very nervous. And then we proposed a conversation between the arresting officer and the county, and Daryl Jackson was the young man's name who was arrested. And both sides agreed. So we decided to begin the conversation separately. And so we started with the police officer, and he said that he felt that he was disrespected by the person he was arresting. And then we went over and talked to Daryl, And he said that he felt that he was disrespected by the police officer. We went back and talked to the police officer, and he said that he was actually afraid for his life because of the car. And then we went back and talked to Daryl, and he said that he was afraid for his life. Now, we have PhDs, so we figured out there was a pattern developing. Yeah, you noticed that, right? And there's something essentially human in both of these people, and their tribes had forbidden them from kind of stepping into and listening to the experience of the other. And we then asked the police officer, what would it take for you to, to drop charges and for us to move beyond this? And he said, well, I don't want to do it, but I'd accept an apology. We went to Daryl and we said, what would it take? He said, it's going to take more than an apology. He said, it's going to take anti-bias training for the entire Porter County Police Department. And we went back to the police and they agreed to it, to drop it. And this is the photograph of the reconciliation at the end. On the right is Daryl Jackson. I know you don't see race, but he's the African-American person on the right. In the center is David Reynolds, still is. In fact, I checked this morning just to make sure before I told the story. He's the county sheriff in Porter County. And John Costas, who's the mayor of Valparaiso, Indiana. And they're signing this kind of agreement. What it really took for us was deep listening and daring to do something that was different. And it was our faith that motivated us to try to make a different sort of difference, to try to build a bridge between these two communities, to try to do something beyond the usual outcomes. Could you go finally to the slide of Dietrich Bonhoeffer at the very, very end? Bonhoeffer says this about listening. The first service we owe others, he actually goes on to say, is not prattling on and not talking and not preaching, but is listening. And whoever stops listening to others will soon stop listening to God. So I want you to do something right now. Okay, ready? I want you to, as we go to the Jesus slide, I want you to tap your chest 6 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now repeat after me. I don't know everything. I don't know everything. I don't know everything. Rap. Okay, stop. Very good. Okay, so like the bishop said yesterday, since you don't know everything and since the job of God is already filled and there are no more applications being taken, you can relax, you can laugh, you can listen to your neighbor, you can trust God because Jesus has handled it all. Thank you very much.
Jesus, you're the center of my joy. All that's good and perfect, it comes from you. You're the heart of my contentment, hope for all I do. Jesus, you're the center of my joy. When I lost my direction, You're the compass for my way. You're the fire and light when nights are long and cold. In sadness, you are my laughter that shatters all my fears. When I'm all alone, your hand is there to hold. Oh, oh, my Jesus, you're the center of my joy. All that's good and perfect, it comes from you. You're the heart of my contentment, hope for all I do. Jesus, you're the center of my joy. You are why I find pleasure in the simple things in life. You're the song in the meadows and the streams, the voices of the children, my family and my home. You're the source and finish of my highest dreams. Oh, 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 my Jesus, you're the center of my joy. All that's good and perfect, it comes from you. You're the heart of my contentment, hope for all I do. Jesus, oh, you are the center of my joy. Jesus, oh, you are the center of my joy. Jesus, oh, you are the center of my joy. Oh, you picked me up and you turned me around and you placed my feet on solid ground. Oh, they hung him high. Oh, they stretched him wide. He hung his head for you and me. He died. Oh, but that's not how the story ends. Oh, 3 days later, he rose again. Oh, my Jesus. Oh, my Jesus. You are the center of my joy. Jesus, you're the center of my joy. Oh.